We were half naked, preparing dash for our therapy. That's when I noticed the door to the barn creak open, just slightly at first, but it was enough to yank me out of whatever meditative connection I'd managed with the donkey. Colton stood there, stiff and confused. What the hell? But let's start from the beginning. I was working on a new design project, but the colors and shapes blurred together. My fingers tapped restlessly against the desk, mind wandering to places it shouldn't. These distracting thoughts had plagued me for weeks now, making it impossible to focus on work. Even my usual creative outlets, painting, hiking, cooking, nothing seemed to scratch this persistent itch under my skin. Colton's predictable routine echoed through our house, the same morning coffee, same goodbye kiss, same evening woodworking in the garage. The stability that once felt comforting now seemed suffocating. Every touch between us felt mechanical, planned, lacking the spark I desperately craved. I needed to talk to someone who'd understand. Elise had always been my emotional compass since childhood. One text later, we agreed to meet at our favorite coffee shop downtown. The familiar bell chimed as I pushed open the door. Elise sat at our usual corner table, her blonde braid draped over one shoulder, looking fresh despite probably spending the morning working on the farm. The sight of her immediately loosened something in my chest. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, sliding my usual latte across the table. The cafe's ambient noise provided enough privacy for me to spill everything, the restlessness, the overwhelming desires, the growing distance with Colton. My cheeks burned as I described the intensity of these feelings, but Elise's expression remained open and understanding. Lack of intimacy, desire to do it all the time. I was just thirsty and hungry at the same time. "I know exactly what you're going through," she said, leaning forward. "I went through something similar last year. It was like this constant hunger that nothing could satisfy." I gripped my coffee cup tighter. "How did you handle it?" "Mum actually helped me through it." Elise's eyes lit up with that familiar sparkle she got when sharing something intriguing. She has this, unconventional approach to dealing with these kinds of situations. It's hard to explain here, but if you're interested, come out to the farm. Mum's really good at helping people work through this stuff. And it doesn't involve cheating with other men. The thought of Marlena knowing about my intimate struggles made me pause, but I'd always admired her wisdom and non-judgmental nature. She had this way of seeing through society's expectations to what really mattered. Would she mind? I mean, this isn't exactly normal coffee chat material. Elise chuckled. "Trust me, nothing phases Mum. Remember when she caught us trying to perform that midnight ritual we read about in 8th grade? She just handed us better candles and taught us about fire safety." That memory brought a genuine smile to my face. "When should I come by?" "Tomorrow afternoon? Colton's got that cycling meet-up, right?" I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and relief. The farm had always been my second home, and maybe, just maybe, Marlene would have answers to questions I wasn't even sure how to ask. Next day, I pulled up to my best friend's family farm. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered red barn and surrounding fields. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, heart pounding with a mix of uncertainty and something else. Anticipation, maybe. The farm sprawled out before me, so different from my manicured suburban neighborhood with its perfectly trimmed lawns and identical houses. Here, wildflowers grew freely along the fence lines, their purple and yellow blooms swaying in the breeze. The old farmhouse stood proudly at the end of the drive, its white paint peeling slightly around the edges, giving it character rather than looking neglected. I spotted Marlene on the wraparound porch before I even turned off the engine. She sat in an old wooden rocking chair, grey hair loose around her shoulders, wearing well-worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt. No pretense, no carefully curated image like back home, just authentic comfort. Stepping out of my car, the rich smell of earth and hay hit me. A chicken scratched in the dirt nearby, completely unfazed by my presence. The whole scene felt worlds away from my desk, my computer screens, my perfectly organized workspace that lately felt more like a prison than a creative haven. "Rin!" Marlene's voice carried across the yard as she stood up. "Come on up here, honey. I've got some fresh lemonade waiting." I made my way up the creaky wooden steps, taking in the collection of mismatched furniture on the porch, weathered chairs, an old metal glider, clay pots bursting with herbs. Everything here seemed to have a story, a purpose beyond just looking nice. The screen door squeaked as Marlene held it open for me. Inside, sunlight streamed through windows draped with simple cotton curtains. The kitchen table was solid wood, marked with decades of use, coffee rings, knife scores, watermarks from countless mason jars. So different from my sleek glass dining table that I obsessively wiped clean of fingerprints. Sitting in Elise's family kitchen felt oddly familiar, as though I'd been missing a piece of myself that only places like this could fill. The lace curtains barely let the sunlight filter through, throwing a soft glow over the wooden countertops and shelves lined with old jars and herbs I couldn't fully identify. Marlene stood by the sink, pouring us more lemonade, while Elise leaned casually against the old oak table, watching me like she knew what I was thinking before I did. And honestly, I didn't know how to feel about everything just yet. Visiting here, letting Marlene see through all the polished layers I kept up in the suburban life back home, it felt like admitting something was broken. It wasn't that Colton and I were bad, not exactly. But there was this suffocating comfort, something more like inertia than love, a creeping sameness that felt like it was swallowing me whole most days. "So, Bryn?" Marlene said, setting down a fresh glass of lemonade in front of me, her eyes searching mine like she could read my thoughts. "Elise mentioned that you've been feeling stuck." I managed to nod. The words weren't coming easy that day. Marlene didn't push. She simply sat at the table across from me, pulling sections of her greying hair behind her ears, casual as if we were discussing weather patterns. "You've probably tried it all already, haven't you? The talking, the searching, another book, another therapist. And yet, there you are, still feeling like something's missing. Why?" Her voice had a weight to it, not judgment but understanding, which made it even harder to answer. So when she kept talking, it was almost a relief. See, most people think fidelity is this thing locked in with a person, a relationship framed by rules. But what if it's about something deeper? Honoring your vows doesn't necessarily mean confining what feels right for you, she said. Her smile was soft but piercing at the same time. Your needs aren't wrong, Bryn, and they certainly don't make you a bad wife or a bad person. The air in the room felt heavier for a moment, and all I could do was look down at the weathered wood of the table, tracing the grain with my thumb like it'd give me some clarity. Marlene kept watching me, leaning in, voice barely above a murmur. "I've always believed there are paths that allow you to be true to yourself and to your commitments, without compromise or betrayal." I wasn't sure where she was going with this. Something flickered in Elise's gaze as she glanced at her mum, like this was a conversation they'd had before. And then Marlene said something I hadn't expected. "There's Dash, out at the pasture. You remember him, our donkey?" I nodded slowly. Dash had been a fixture here for as long as I could remember. A friendly, quiet animal, probably the only one around here who looked as detached from human concerns as I felt. "There's a deep-rooted connection between us and the animals we share our lives with," she said. "They're uncomplicated, pure in their connection to the natural world, and sometimes they can offer us something we can't get from other people, something beyond the definitions we normally cling to." I stared at her, trying to wrap my mind around her words. Marlene leaned back then, her expression unwavering. Being close with Dash, or any animal really, there's a purity in that connection that transcends the physical. No betrayal in it, no lies. It's about learning how to reconnect with something simple, finding what intimacy means at its core, without restrictions or judgment. In the past, I tried doing this kind of therapy with horses, but they're too big, too wild. The silence that followed wasn't oppressive. Elise sipped on her lemonade like she'd heard her mother speak 1,000,000 times. Like this was casual talk for a Tuesday afternoon. Could have been a conversation on crop rotations for all she seemed to react. I stared at Marlene and Elise, trying to process their suggestion. My face flushed red with a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. The kitchen's warmth suddenly felt stifling. "Really?" I shifted in my wooden chair. "You mean, with Dash?" Elise reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The familiar gesture helped ground me as she shared her own journey. She spoke of feeling lost in her previous relationship, how connecting with the animals here had helped her rediscover herself. Her words held no judgment, only understanding. Marlene stood up from the table. Let's introduce you properly. My legs felt wobbly as I followed them out to the barn. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the wooden slats. Dash stood in his stall, his long ears perking up at our approach. He was beautiful in an unconventional way, strong, gentle, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Go on," Marlene encouraged. "Say hello." I stepped forward, extending my hand palm up like they showed me. Dash's whiskers tickled my skin as he sniffed me. My heartbeat quickened at the intimate contact. His breath was warm, his presence solid and real in a way that made my carefully constructed suburban life feel paper-thin. "That's it," Marlene's voice was soft. "Just breathe. Feel the connection." I ran my hand along Dash's neck, marveling at the contrasting textures, coarse hair over warm muscle. He leaned into my touch, and something inside me unclenched. Tears pricked at my eyes, catching me off guard. I hadn't realized how touch-starved I'd become, how much I'd been holding back. Elise and Marlenia kept their distance, giving me space while remaining supportive presences. I felt safe here in this rustic barn, away from expectations and pretense. With each stroke of Dash's coat, each quiet moment of connection, I felt myself crossing a threshold into something new and transformative. And Dash? It felt like he already knew what to do. The next day, I couldn't think about anything else. This experience was something out of the world. I had to do it again. Pretty soon, those initial hesitant visits to the farm turned into regular weekly trips. Maybe one week I'd go twice if I felt especially disconnected. At first, I hadn't told Colton much of anything. I didn't know how to explain it. How could I? "Oh, I just really hit it off with Elise's donkey, is all." Sure, that'd go over well. But over time, lying about it, or not exactly lying, but omitting enough that it felt the same, grew more and more uncomfortable. Every time Colton asked how my day went, guilt pushed into my throat like an iron spike. Colton had asked enough times why I needed to visit the farm so often, why I seemed less interested in our nights in, Netflix on in the background while he sat on his computer doing something work-related. Little comments would float in between his explanations, just small stingers about how much time I was spending up there. He thought I was overwhelmed with work, maybe strung out. I think even then, there was a gnawing suspicion tugging at him like rot beneath the surface. Somewhere between the empty reassurances and sitting in the barn with Dash, fingers resting in his coarse hair, something shifted in me. It's not like I expected Colton to understand. Hell, I barely did. I thought maybe, if I just kept this part separate, just for me, it wouldn't matter. It was innocent, right? We weren't hurting anyone. We even started to do it together. Then came the day Colton just showed up. No warning. I was in the barn with Elise and Marlene, like usual, Dash energetic as always. Elise was half naked with her mum. We were preparing Dash for our therapy. That's when I noticed the door to the barn creak open. Just slightly at first, but it was enough to yank me out of whatever meditative connection I'd managed with Dash. Colton stood there, stiff and confused. I hadn't seen that expression on his face before. Alarm, mixed with an odd cocktail of disgust and panic. "What the hell?" Colton had barely stepped into the barn, his voice louder than I'd heard in a while. I stood up too fast, my hand still outstretched toward Dash, like I was caught somehow. Elise side-glanced at me before awkwardly stepping back. It was clear she realized the kind of explosion gathering. "Colton, wait!" His phone came out before I could say anything. His fingers fumbled as he angled it toward me and the fucking donkey, his hand slightly shaking. You could tell he wanted proof for whatever horrible version he'd built up in his head. He backstepped. His eyes were wide, too much white showing, like everything had snapped. I launched into whatever I could think of, trying to explain that this wasn't what it looked like, because it really wasn't. I mean, yes, I'd become close with Dash, but it wasn't not like that. He was an animal. It's nothing like cheating, right? "Colton, listen, it's not what you think. It's Dash. I've just been connecting with him. It's Marlene and her philosophy, it's not like I'm with someone else, it's different. Colton's face twisted further. He wasn't having it. I tried again, talking too fast, stumbling over my own justification. It wasn't like this broke our vows, I told him. Nothing about this undermines our relationship. Are you all listening to yourselves? Colton's voice trembled. He closed his mouth, shaking his head. I could see anger boiling under his skin, his ears reddening. Then, without another word, he stormed out of the barn, his steps uneven, like he was barely holding onto himself. Marlene stepped forward at that point, her practical calm settling something in me, even as I quaked from how quickly everything had spiraled. You might have let him process, but before she could finish, Colton was already outside, dialing. I heard the low mutters as he paced, and then my stomach dropped. It kicked in what he was doing. I heard him before I fully believed it. I whipped around to Marlene, who was already moving towards the barn doors. He's calling the cops, I managed to spit out, my heartbeat so loud in my ears I almost couldn't hear the words as they fell out. Marlene didn't flinch. Elise looked over at her mum but stayed rooted, confused maybe, or just in shock too. Within minutes, the sirens started pulling up the dirt path. Everything inside me screamed, everything felt wrong. They dragged me outside. Elise followed, frozen in disbelief as they approached us, cuffing wrists. Colton stood aside, arms folded tight, refusing to even look directly at me now, as if just the sight had become something too monstrous for him. His betrayal impacted heavier than the spinning lights or our neighbors watching from down the roadway. And, just like that, in a moment that seemed to stretch decades, they'd herded us into separate squad cars. News vans started pulling in shortly after, lenses poised like vultures. I couldn't even bring myself to look back at the barn, where Dash stood, oblivious now, just chewing his hay, eyes reflecting the colors of a spiraling disaster I couldn't undo. The madness started so fast I barely had time to make sense of it. We were still in shock from being hauled off the farm in handcuffs when the news broke. It was surreal seeing my face on every goddamn local news station, plastered under headlines that made us out to be these horrible people. I don't know who the hell leaked it, but the story was twisted beyond recognition before it even hit the airwaves. They didn't care about context, or the truth for that matter. Suburban affair with farm animal scandal, one of the headlines read, big bold letters splashed across the screen while they looped footage of Colton screaming to the police outside the barns. The story became tangled like some kind of perverse game of telephone. Comments on social media were nasty, calling us everything from delusional to dangerous. The media didn't help either, talking like it was some cult activity out on Elise's farm. They framed Marlene like she had orchestrated some dark ritual. Part of me wished I could shake people, make them see there wasn't anything emotional, just pure physical sensation. Elise wasn't even answering her phone anymore. I couldn't blame her. As soon as the reporters showed up at her doorstep, camping between the chicken coops and cornfields, she shut down. Marlene, of course, acted like it didn't faze her. I figured she'd dealt with whispering small-town bullshit most of her life. But this was different. We weren't just the subject of gossip over a cup of coffee at the diner. Everyone in the world, or at least it felt like it, was watching. My neighbors, people I'd waved to every morning for years, started giving me this cold shoulder routine that felt like a slap in the face. I walked out to get the mail one morning, and my sweet old next-door neighbor, Mrs. Stevens, pulled her grandkids inside like I was some kind of predator. That stung. Worse was Colton, who refused to even look at me, couldn't even sit in the same room without this disgust all over his face. I'd never seen him like that before. How the entire community turned on us. There wasn't a single mom at the grocery store who wouldn't shoot daggers from behind piles of fresh produce, whispering as I passed. Even the PTA meetings, which were boring as sin before, had turned into minefields. People were saying things behind my back, but not well enough for me not to hear. How a scandal like this turned into something biblical in nature, I'll never understand. Everything spiraled so quickly. The fallout was immediate. The charges, initially confusing even to me, escalated quickly once everything hit the papers. I remember sitting there in that cold, sterile courtroom as they tried to frame my time with Dash as something incredibly lurid, like the whole story had twisted out of control, morphing into this monster I didn't recognize. the prosecutor was practically salivating at the chance to drag my name through the mud, playing up the angle that I had somehow subverted normal boundaries. They had no idea what it was really about. God, I barely did. I was first-time offender, the sentence for bestiality, probation and fine, also mandatory counseling and rehabilitation. Colton didn't waste any time filing for divorce. That part burned, not because I didn't see it coming, but because of how systematic it felt. He became this stranger overnight, distancing himself publicly, keeping his hands clean of the whole mess. Our house, our meticulously curated life, stopped belonging to me almost in an instant. I packed up my things, almost numb, filling boxes with the pieces of a life I used to feel so trapped in. It was sad, I suppose, but there was something freeing about it too, a different kind of end I hadn't expected. The whispers followed. Friends, or people I thought were friends, quickly distanced themselves. I'd pass people in the grocery store and there was always this shift of energy. Not a direct confrontation, just a tightening of lips, a sideways glance, as if people were measuring their distance from me. It was like they were disgusted by proximity alone, by what they'd read in the tabloids or heard through the grapevine. Every headline boiled things down into something so grotesque and simplistic, a suburban wife throwing away her safe, perfect life for something so misunderstood, something that, well, I'm not even sure I could explain back then either, but it wasn't that. Work became nearly impossible to keep up with. Freelance clients dropped one by one, citing vague reasons, but I knew the real reason was always the same, lurking behind their overly formal emails or abrupt, "Sorry, we've decided to go in a different direction" notes. A few stuck around longer than others out of loyalty, sure, but eventually they all moved on, wiped their hands clean. I found myself staring at my bank statements with a creeping panic, slowly realizing that the safety net I had counted on wasn't going to be there for long. The worst part? People didn't even want to hear my side. It's like everyone had already decided who I was before I could even say a word. Elise offered her guest room without hesitation, and I accepted. What choice did I have? My clients had all ghosted me, my savings were draining fast from legal fees, and my phone buzzed constantly with messages I didn't dare read. The drive to the farm felt different this time. The same winding country roads that once promised freedom now felt like an escape route. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I passed familiar landmarks, the old oak tree, the broken fence post, the rusty mailbox marking the turn to the Carter property. Marlene waited on the porch, her silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. No judgment in her eyes, just that same steady wisdom that had drawn me here in the first place. She wrapped me in a tight hug, and I broke down right there. "Come on inside, dear, the kettle's already on." The farmhouse kitchen, with its worn wooden table and herbed bundles hanging from the ceiling, became my sanctuary. The world outside might have branded me a deviant, but here I could breathe. Elise brought me chamomile tea in my favorite chipped mug, the one I'd always used during our childhood sleepovers. Each morning, I'd wake to roosters crowing and the distant bleating of sheep. The farm's rhythm slowly started to ground me. I helped Elise with chores, my hands learning the satisfaction of physical work. Marlene taught me about her herbs, ancient wisdom passed down through generations. But I couldn't ignore the whispers when we went into town for supplies, the sideways glances, the mothers pulling their children closer, the checkout girl who refused to meet my eyes. Each trip was a reminder that I'd become some kind of modern-day witch, cast out from proper society. Dash wasn't there anymore. He had been taken away after the accusation of bestiality. Instead, I spent hours in Marlene's garden, pulling weeds with probably too much force, trying to root out my own shame along with the unwanted plants. The soil under my fingernails felt like penance. Living at Marlena's farm brought an unexpected rhythm to my life. Each morning I woke before sunrise to help with the chores, feeding chickens, tending the herb garden and cleaning the barn. Manual labor gave my restless mind something tangible to focus on. After 3 months of living in relative isolation, I started volunteering at the local animal shelter. The director, Sarah, was one of the few people who didn't look at me with judgment in her eyes. She assigned me to the small animals section, away from larger livestock. I spent hours cleaning cages, feeding rabbits, and socializing scared cats. Each tiny victory, a formerly feral kitten purring in my lap, or a nervous rabbit accepting treats from my hand, felt like a step towards something resembling redemption. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me understand the void I'd tried to fill. Our weekly sessions were uncomfortable but necessary, peeling back layers of unmet needs and suppressed desires. She never judged my actions, instead helping me explore the patterns that led to my choices. One rainy afternoon, sitting in Marlene's kitchen, while thunder rolled outside, I finally wrote the letter I'd been avoiding for months. Dear Colton, I've started this letter 100 times in my head. Each attempt feels inadequate, but I owe you the truth of what I've learned about myself, about us, and about the pain I caused. What happened wasn't about you. I know that sounds like a cliché, but it's true. I was lost in ways I couldn't articulate, searching for something I couldn't name. Instead of talking to you about my struggles, I chose a path that destroyed what we built together. The stability you offered, which I once saw as suffocating, I now recognize as the foundation I took for granted. You deserved a partner who could communicate her needs, not someone who ran from them in the most destructive way possible. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm not even asking for a response. I just want you to know that I understand the depth of hurt I caused, and I carry that understanding with me every day. I'm working to become someone who won't repeat these mistakes, someone who can face her struggles honestly instead of running from them. You were a good husband, Colton. The failure was mine. Bryn. I sealed the envelope but held on to it for days, running my fingers over the edges each morning. Finally, on a clear Sunday, I drove to our old neighborhood and slipped it into his mailbox. I didn't linger, didn't hope to catch a glimpse of him. Some bridges stay burned, and that's the price we pay for our choices. Back at the farm, I threw myself into preparing the herb garden for winter. Marlene taught me about each plant's properties: healing, grounding, cleansing. My hands in the dirt, I felt more present than I had in years. The whispers in town continued, but they carried less weight now. I was learning to carry my own truth, heavy as it was. After years, the headlines about me faded, replaced by newer scandals. Still, I rarely venture into town except for therapy sessions with Dr. Chen. Some locals still whisper when they see me, but most have moved on to fresher gossip. The farm work keeps me grounded. I wake before dawn to help with the morning chores, feeding chickens, tending the herb garden, maintaining the greenhouse. My hands, once pristine from office work, are now calloused and strong. There's an honest simplicity in manual labor that I never knew I needed. Elise took a huge risk standing by me through everything. She lost some business partnerships when people associated her farm with the scandal, but she never wavered, never made me feel like a burden. We spend evenings on the porch drinking Marlene's herbal tea, talking about everything and nothing. Marlene's wisdom continues to guide me. She taught me about medicinal herbs, showing me how to dry them properly, brew teas for different ailments. The knowledge passed down through generations of her family now flows through my hands too. Last spring, we quietly expanded our farm family, a new therapy program, more discreet this time. The barn houses some new residents, including a gentle donkey named Spirit. There's something different now, though. I approach it with hard-earned wisdom rather than desperation. Sometimes I catch Marlene watching me work in the garden, a knowing look in her eyes. "You've found your roots," she'd told me recently. "Sometimes we need to be uprooted completely to grow properly." The occasional letter arrives from my old life. My ex-husband Colton remarried last year. While it stung, I felt genuine hope for his happiness. Neighbors probably still lock their barn doors when they hear I'm nearby, but I've learnt to laugh about it. Dark humor helps heal old wounds. Tonight, sitting with Elise on our favorite hillside spot, watching the sunset paint the sky in fierce oranges and pinks, I reflect on how completely my life transformed. Not all pain leads to growth, but this journey, despite its cost, led me to an authentic version of myself I never knew existed. "I don't regret staying," I tell Elise, picking at grass stems, "even after everything." The farm saved me in its own way. While society labeled me an outcast, this land accepted me without judgment. Here, among the herbs and animals, I found a different kind of freedom, not the wild abandon I once sought, but a grounded connection to what matters.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.